What's up, gangsters? How about a little bit of a how-to on applying Eduard, the new Eduard decals. Now you might be saying, wait a minute, you've done videos on how to apply decals before. What's different now? Well, the keywords are Eduard and new. Okay, so these are from the P51D kit. And these decals were produced in 2020. And they are done using a new digital printing process that Eduard has started doing so that they can print their decals in-house. And overall, they're pretty nice decals. But there's this trick that you can allegedly do where once you apply the decal, you can peel or remove the clear carrier film, which has some immediate and obviously compelling aspects to it. Having a decal with zero clear film is, of course, the holy grail. And the wet transfers from folks like HGW and Archer, which are made to do that, are a good example of why. I've used both of those products in other projects. But these Eduard things are not made to do that. And I put that in heavy air quotes because it's not officially supported. Although they did do a step-by-step tutorial in one of their newsletters a couple of years ago. It's September of 2022 right now, and I think it was like in their 2019 September newsletter, maybe 2020 September of 2020. I don't remember, but it's, it's sort of supported, but not officially. It's kind of a weird deal. And the reason that I'm doing this tutorial is because, number one, I needed to test it because I'm going to be using these on a project, and I wanted to find out for myself how to do it. And number two, because nobody can seem to agree on exactly which version of the decals it works on and exactly how to do it. I've been told that there's 3 different versions of these decals since the original ones came out, and that allegedly the process has gotten better with each version, even though it's not really a process. It's sort of a happy accident, a bug that turned into a feature, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of a weird deal. Anyway, enough of me mouthing off about it. Let's just get to how to actually make it happen. All right, so here we go. First things first, any good how-to video should probably start with the materials necessary. So, first things first is this sheet of Eduard decals. And these are out of the P51D Mustang kit that includes the Ridge Runner and American Beauty decals. All right, and these are printed by Eduard, and the date on them is 2020. Doesn't say what month. I don't know. I've heard different things. Some people say anything after July 2020 is the new decals. I've heard that there are 3 different versions since then. I don't really know, but bottom line is, neither will you when you get them, and so you're probably just going to have to experiment to see if the technique that I'm going to demonstrate here will actually work. But the main thing is that these are the digitally printed decals as opposed to standard silkscreen decals. Now, it may be that it's only the color that's digitally printed. I honestly don't know. It may be that the clear film is applied via silkscreen because I don't know of any printing technology that will do that otherwise. So I don't really know. Again, it doesn't really matter though, because the bottom line is the technique either works or it doesn't. So these are the decals we're going to work with. I've already chopped out a couple of them. This one obviously is going to have plenty of clear film to remove. And then this one, a little bit more standard, just looks kind of fun. What are we going to put them on? That's also important. I've got this, my well-abused paint mule. I think this is the old Revell Mustang. I don't know. I've done so many things to this poor little dude. I don't know. But the important part is that over here, I've got some very well-cured Tamiya LP11, which is, I guess, kind of appropriate because it's the perfect paint to simulate the silver lacquer that was put on Mustang wings at the factory. So, as you can see, it is nice and glossy, so even if you believe in the nonsense about having to put decals on a gloss surface, this should be sufficient. I mean, let's be honest. With the way some of you guys spray your gloss, this is already way smoother than that. So it should be fine, but it's going to go straight on the paint just like I always do. How are we going to put it on? All right, I've got my decal water here, and I've got some Mr. Mark Setter. Now, why am I choosing Mr. Mark Setter? Because I've got a whole drawer full of different decal softeners. I used this in my first test of this technique because Mr. Mark Setter has an adhesive component in it. You can see that's why it's kind of got this milky look to it. I don't really know what the adhesive in there is. Doesn't really matter. The bottom line is this is supposed to soften decals as well as aid in sticking them to the model more firmly. And it just made sense to me that since what we want with this technique is for the colored part to really stick and the clear part to not stick, that this might be a good option. I don't know if that logic really holds up, because if I put it on there under the decal, obviously it's going to be on some of the clear film as well. So yeah, that logic may not make any sense, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it. So at any rate, let's go ahead and get the decals in the water. And what I've been told, one of my buddies, Shane Doak, who is a really good model maker, he feels like it's important to only put them in the water for about 10 seconds. So I'm watching the clock on the camera screen here so that I know when that is. Now, this decal water is my standard decal water, and it is about 20% microset, which is basically vinegar. It's acetic acid. And all that's intended to do is to act as a wetting agent and to make it a little bit easier for the decal to move around. So that's about 10 seconds. And you can see that thing is already lifting off of the paper, no problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just come over here and I'm going to apply a little bit of this softener. Don't want to rub it around too much because there is a solvent agent in there. I'm pretty sure that it's an alcohol-based softener. Whoops, I got a little folded up underneath there. That's not good, so I'm going to slide it back over. Anyway, what you don't want to do is a bunch of rubbing around on your paint finish with a decal softener, solvent, whatever you want to call it, that's probably got an alcohol component in it, because that could result in a bad day. So you just need to be, smart about that. All right, now I've got the other decal in the water as well. I'm going to go ahead and pull it out. And I'm now taking a Q-tip that's got decal water in it, and I'm just very carefully going to mash this decal down, not because I'm really trying to make it stick better, but just to make sure that there's not any wrinkles in it, and that the solvent, softener, whatever, is evenly spread under the film, and that it's in the right spot. Now, with that, though, I'm going to just basically leave it sitting there. I'm not going to do anything else to it. In my test, I also put some Mr. Mark Setter on top of one of my test samples. And I'm not going to do that this time for two reasons. One is because it proved not to be necessary in my other test. The decal settled in just fine without that. And because it also made the film significantly more difficult to remove in that test sample. So, not going to do that this time. I'm going to put the edge of this decal on top of that aileron hinge fairing right there because I want to see how well it will conform with just Mr. Mark Setter underneath it. I don't know, how well it will, but we'll see. So that's that, and that's the end of that part of the demo. We'll come back tomorrow and take a look at these decals, and hopefully they'll be happy and ready for us to do the film removal part of the demonstration. Okay, here we go, back at it again. It is the next morning, about 18 hours later, and let's take a look. I haven't even inspected these yet myself, so we'll find out together how it turned out overnight. And it looks pretty good. If you refer back to the previous segment, you'll know that when I left these, just with setting solution, softening solution, whatever you want to call it, on them, that they didn't look super great. Like, this was not conforming to the aileron hinge fairing, and so it's good to see that the way that I did it left them almost completely as they should be. Now, not completely, because if I get the camera angle correct, there you go. Look at those bubbles. Some pretty big bubbles. That happens. That's a thing. And look, even on a nice, slick, glossy surface. So, once again, evidence that what's under the decal is just not that important, and certainly not guaranteed to prevent the sort of bubble making that causes silvering. So there's that. Now, we are going to do the peeling thing, and we've definitely waited for long enough, but a lot of people ask, how long do you need to wait? People I trust have said anything from 4 to 24 hours. So I don't think there's really a hard and fast rule on that. For me, it was just convenient to wait until the next day. Now, let's do one thing, because you can see that there's a little bit of, I don't know if it's residue or perturbation of the surface caused by setting solution, but let's see if we can deal with that. I'm going to just take a Q-tip that I just put a little spit on and rub it across there and see if it, because sometimes what you get there is just adhesive that's washed out from underneath the decal film, and that's often what will cause that sort of blush, that whitish blush that you see around a decal. Okay, so anyway, we can see that some of that surface disturbance is definitely not wanting to come up. So, I don't know if it's in the paint or if it's on the film or what. Now, it's not going to matter because the goal is to remove the film. But some people have said that they don't like these decals because the film is too thick or it shows too much, and they don't want to use them as regular decals. But, when I look at this, honestly, it's hard to agree with that. This film is pretty thin. The edges do show a little bit in some places, and I don't like that. But if I were going to do these as normal decals and leave the film on there, I would be going over this with something like aqua gloss and then doing a light sanding before I put my final flat coat on there, and that would hide those edges. Now, that would not be happening though in this particular case, because I don't intend to put any clear coat over this silver lacquer. I want it to look like the real thing, and that did not get clear coated. It was just lacquer, just paint. So I'd like to avoid that if I could. But if these were normal decals on, a normal flat olive drab or whatever, then there would definitely be some clear going on top of that, because I'd probably be doing oil paint rendering, etc. This is going to get none of that, so it's analogous to a bare metal finish where I don't want to have to do any additional steps afterwards to the decals. And that's where removing the film comes in. So let's get on with that. The sort of standard method is to grab the film with tweezers and lift it off. And I'm going to try that. I was not very successful with that in my other test. I just couldn't get it to lift easily. It came off in little shreds, and I got frustrated with that pretty quickly. I might have gotten 10% of it off before I just was like over it. So let's do this. Some people have said that getting the edge of the film to start lifting is easier if you use something like a toothpick to kind of push on it. And you can definitely see that it's happening there. It's hard. Let me get the camera down here a little closer. You can see, like right there, the edge of the film is already kind of curled up, but it's not really giving me anything to work with, is it? Kind of got some moving over here, and you can see where it's coming up, but like it's nothing like enough to let me grab onto it and just yank it off of there, which is, that's the idea. So that's frustrating. I'm not even going to mess with that anymore, because I already know it's not going to work. And even if it did work well, I think that what I'm about to do is so much easier and effective that there's just no reason not to do it. And that is this mineral spirits trick. This is a trick that's been around for some years. It works on some decals, not at all on others. It seems to be a happy coincidence, though, that it works really well on these Eduard decals. And it is almost miraculous. Watch. Okay, this is just plain old 100% mineral spirits from the hardware store. I'm sticking a Q-tip in there, getting it really wet, and I'm just gonna put some here. And some people say it's a good idea to just put some on there and let it sit. You can do that if you want to, but either way, what I find is that you want to use plenty of it, because that results in the least amount of rubbing, which is a good thing. I don't worry about mineral spirits messing up this Tamiya LP11, because it's a very hard shell lacquer, and as long as I'm using plain mineral spirits, it should be impervious to it. But this is the point to stress that when I say 100% mineral spirits, that's the deal. don't use something that says enamel thinners on it. Like, you know, Humbrol makes some, Testors makes some, Tamiya makes some, and the reason that it's called enamel thinners is because it's got other stuff in it, and they can't call it 100% mineral spirits. And the other stuff that's in it is typically stuff like xylene, which is very hot, and it will definitely make you have a bad day because it will fuck up just about any kind of paint. So just stay away from that. Now, while I've been talking and rubbing here, you've been able to see a couple of things. Looks like I've gotten pretty much all of the film off of where the T is, and you can see kind of these little wads of it kind of coming up. You can see that it is not affecting the decal much, although look, a little bit came off right there, and maybe that was a bubble where it wasn't really stuck very well. So that could be a problem if that, you know, if that didn't fit in with your overall look. It also seems like that right here, it's either not wanting to come up or there's a defect in the surface caused by the Mr. Mark setter. And I'll dry it off a little bit and see if we can get a better look at that. Okay, so now you can see that most of the film is off of that part, but not all of it. And that, you know, some of those surface disturbances are definitely still there. And again, in this case, I wouldn't be super stoked about that because I want a pristine paint surface. But in most cases, I wouldn't care because that would either get blended in with weathering or it just wouldn't show up at all by the time I was all done. But let me keep rubbing on this and see if I can get the remainder of the film to come off. Oh, now I'm starting to rub hard enough. See, a little fleck of the decal itself came off there. So, you know, it's getting to the point where I've got to decide if I'm going to keep at it, if I'm going to just go with what I've got. Because now, this is what I've found, is that once the colored part starts to shift, it gets easier. And you might even decide that that's a weathering technique if you want to chip that a little bit. You know, it looks pretty authentic. But let me just stop with that and let me tackle the other one and see what we get over there.
Para mi gente, con una pasión tan fuerte. Ay, 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 ahora sigo cantando y sigo gozando, yo sigo cantando.
Okay, so there you go. That is not too bad, pretty cool, but you can still see some places, if I can get it oriented correctly, where there is either film still there. See right there next to the right hand wing of the eagle, you can still see like what's either a little ridge of film that remains or it's a disturbance in the paint. I don't know which. I've looked at it under magnification and I'm not sure. And then you've still got this area right there on the inside of the F that definitely is not right. And again, I don't know if that's in the paint or if it's remnants of the film, but I want to try an experiment. I think it's film. So let's get a little more aggro. Here is some microsol, which, as we know, is a relatively mild decal softener. So get a little bit of that on a Q-tip, and let's see what happens if we attack that film a little bit with this. Something's happening. I'm not sure it's a good thing. There's some film or something coming up there, and it doesn't seem to be tearing up the paint. Although, you know, there's a little something on the end of that Q-tip, so it could be. It looks a little better than it did, though. And there's definitely these little wads of something, which makes me think that some of what's coming up there is film. Now, one thing that has been said by several people who have reported on this technique is that the decal film, or that the decal itself, the colored portion, is extremely fragile after you do this technique, and that you absolutely must put a clear coat on top of it. And I'm just not finding that to be true. I think you can see, I mean, I was rubbing on it with mineral spirits pretty aggressively, and that didn't shift the ink. I also tested that with IPA in my previous test, which I could do because I was putting those on foil, which was not going to be disturbed by pretty much any chemicals short of acid. And I could rub on the ink part of the decal with IPA on a Q-tip, and it didn't do anything to it. Now, you can see, though, with microsol on there, that it definitely is having a little bit of an effect, and that should be no surprise. Microsol is a blend of alcohols, and you know, we know different alcohols will do different things, but look, that little ridge that was showing up over there, the microsol is taking that off very easily. I'm not having to rub that aggressively at all to deal with that. That cleaned that up very nicely. Over here, it was taking more work, and it started to get into the decal ink itself. And again, because I've got a little bit of something on this Q-tip, you know, I think the bottom line is that this is just one of those things where you have to be careful and calculated with your with your escalation, because, you know, things could go very wrong very quickly, and obviously you don't want that. And it's one of those things where understanding your materials is really important, because obviously if I were doing any of these shenanigans on top of a pure acrylic, that would be a bad move. So, you know, this might be a case actually for using a gloss under the decals, not to prevent silvering or any of that nonsense, but to give you a chemical barrier for when you start doing this film removal technique, so that you did not disturb the paint. That's a pretty rational reason for doing it. So anyway, I think that overall that's that, and I'm pretty pleased with the results. I think as far as these little bubbles go that, and one of them has already popped and disappeared. Let's just very quickly here, we'll take, do the standard thing, and I'm doing this without magnification, so hopefully I get it right. Oops, yep, see, scratched it. Just poke a little hole in it, and it lifted. So that, that's not a good thing. But that's the standard thing that you got to do when you got a bubble. And then, I would probably I would have been much more careful in real life, and then come back and used a little bitty brush to put a very tiny bit of microsol on it, and that would have taken care of the bubble. But you can see it popped loose there and left a little bit of the paint showing underneath. Which again, that might not bother you depending on what your end goal is. There's also a few little wrinkles around where it conformed to that hinge fairing, but not too bad. And I mean, honestly, that's kind of what you have to expect, because you're trying to stretch a not stretchy material over a complex curved surface. But anyway, I think that's about enough tinkering and rambling, and there you go. Okay, of course I wasn't done. I mean, if you guys have watched any of my nonsense, you know that I can never resist continuing to mess with stuff to see if I can improve on the results. So I worked on this film a little bit more with a Q-tip with some microsol on it, and you can see that I definitely took up some paint with it. So, this is like any sort of chemical sanding process. You got to be very careful and test. I tried to do a better job of getting the film edges out from around the eagle, and I got some improvement, but not a lot. I mean, was it worth doing? Yeah, for sure. But again, you got to be very careful, and it depends on what your desired end result is as to whether or not it's going to blend in with what you're doing, because you can also see that it disturbed the edges of the decal a little bit there too. Noticeable? Nah, not really. The other thing, of course, that I like to do is when I do use decals, as rarely as it is, that I often am going to end up sanding them a little bit to integrate them in with the rest of the weathering. And so I did that here, also because I wanted to see if I could sand out the defects in the paint around those letters. And you can see, I mean, that, for that intent is a really nice result. Those are now painted on letters that have been abraded and worn away to give you those kind of fuzzy edges and places where they've rubbed off of raised surfaces. And I love that. I mean, that's as good a result as I would expect to get if I had masked and painted those letters with lacquer and then done the same operation. And all I did there was a little bit of very controlled sanding with this piece of 1500 grit Infinity sanding sponge, and then just polished it off with this 2500 grit sponge. And that's one of my favorite techniques. I love that. And now with a coat of GX 113 or MRP Super Matte Clear, that would look really, really good, I think. So anyway, that's that. Okay, so there you go. If you've heard about this process and not tried it, maybe that'll be helpful for you. If you've not heard about it, there you go, something new. If you've heard about it, tried it, and been unsuccessful, maybe this will be helpful. If you've heard about it, tried it, and had better results than I did, maybe it will be helpful for me if you let me know down there in the comments what your own results were. At any rate, it's an interesting technique that's definitely got some potential, and if you are contemplating doing it yourself, I would encourage you to get a mule out and do some experimentation. Obviously, there are a bunch of different decal softeners that you can try, and some of them may work better than Mr. Mark Setter. I just chose to stick with that to be consistent with my previous test that I did not do on camera. So, at any rate, I hope it was helpful. I appreciate you watching. As always, much love.